Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, however and whenever you are watching this recording. Here I am, as promised, recording a video of myself as I give you a comprehensive discussion on the second part of our Unit 4 for our course on purposive communication. Just a quick review before you had your chance or before you had your time on viewing this recording, we were all able to learn about the process on how to evaluate different images depending on the intent of the different media types, also reflecting different cultures. We learned about linguistic landscapes. We learned also about online landscapes and the different questions and the tips on how we evaluate those images. For this recording and for this discussion, we shall focus on the other part of how to properly evaluate different communication sources. And this is a way for us to know how we get to respond properly to certain types of different text depending on the cultures that we are all in. In this recording, we will all be learning about the proper way on how to evaluate messages of different types of text reflecting different cultures. Some of you may be asking, why is it so necessary? Why is it so important for all of us to learn how to properly evaluate the different messages that we have all received, that we are all receiving, and we are all encountering in our daily lives each and every day? Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that we are always immersed in so many ways, in so many types, and in so many processes of communication. We are always engaged with several conversations. We are given with several texts to read, several texts to witness, and several media types and text types to devour each and every day. And that is why it's very important for us to know how we understand them and what are the things that we need to get from those texts, to understand from those texts, so we would always reach to a better understanding one way or another. So to begin our discussion, this for this recording, rather, let's talk about the reason why we really need to evaluate messages. The importance of evaluating the effectiveness of the message is by developing and using strategic questions to identify strengths and weaknesses. Whenever we are given the chance to read a certain text or understand or comprehend a certain text, there are always questions and there are always areas that we need to look into in order for us to ensure that there is really quality and that there is really effectiveness on how we understand and how we take part of the message that is given from that particular text or that is present from that particular text. In order to evaluate whether a message is effective, excuse me, we can ask ourselves a series of questions which reflect a message's simplicity, specificity, structure, and stickiness. You know what? When we are given a certain type of text to read, if you are a person who loves to ask, meaning you are skeptic, meaning ganahan kay ka perminti mangutana, ganahan kay imong may bawaan perminti unsa man jud tumong ana unsay pulos ani nga butang, unsay hinungdan ani nga particular text, then you're actually one of the very few people in this world who are considered to be very intellectual in taking many things into a different kind of level. So if you are a skeptic person, you love to ask questions, you love to inquire, you love to see the value in it, you love to see the reason behind it, you love to see the purpose about it, then that's very good because that's one of the basic foundations of a person knowing how to properly evaluate messages. So the first step is for you to know what kind of questions do we need to ask in order for us to know that the message is really effective. So we look into these four areas: simplicity, specificity, structure, and stickiness. These are the four main qualities to know if a message is effective. So let's start with simplicity. In order for a message to be deemed effective, And in order for the message to be simple, we have to ask the two questions. Is the purpose of the message evident? Or is the core message clear? These are the two important questions in order for you to see if the message imbued in that text is simple. If pananglitan the text is not simple, then basically if you're going to ask these two questions, you won't be able to derive at a simple or at a simple or a very precise answer. So it would lead you to a more complicated, or it would lead you to sometimes more confusing response, kind of response, which is not very much good if our intention is to come up with a very effective understanding and a very purposive way of knowing what the text is all about. So if you're after the simplicity of the text, you ask these two questions for you to be easy, for you to have easy access rather of knowing whether that text is or that message is easy to be evaluated or to be understood. Second is specificity, meaning the specifics. This refers to our choices of language and its usage. In order to ensure language is specific, you ask any of these three questions. Is the language specific? Meaning, is it specific to a certain population? Is it specific to a certain genre? Is it specific to a certain kind of group? Is the language concrete rather than abstract? Meaning, is it not figurative? Is it not directed towards figurative language? Do we need to decode something, or the message is there blatantly for everyone to just pick up and understand? Does it use words which have additional meanings and could perhaps be misconstrued? So again, there are sometimes that the language that is being used in a certain message is being misconstrued. Yung kitag misconstrued ka ng gilahig sabot, gilahi og take, which is different or sukwahi sa kung unsay intended nga message or intended purpose for that particular text. So be careful with that. There are really instances that even all of us, we are guilty with this. Sometimes we tend to get the message that is actually not the intended message of that particular text. So we misunderstand, we misinterpret. So there is misconstruction that's happening if there is such a word. So be careful with that. So always go for the specifics in knowing the effectivity of a message. Next is structure. So structure basically looks into how a message is being organized, how it is being written. Does a message have a structure, and is there a more effective way to arrange ideas? Does it follow the usual way of writing a specific message? Is there a body? Is there an introduction there? Is there a conclusion? Or does it have any other sufficient information that is included, but it's not part of that particular structure? So these are some important questions that you also need to ask whenever you are given a certain text and whenever you are given a challenge to evaluate the message that is being conveyed on that particular text. So again, those are the four main questions that you ask yourselves, or you ask the text in order for the text to be deemed effective and in order for the message to be deemed clear. I hope as I continue with this recording, everything is clear. If you have questions along the way with this recording, kindly let me know by commenting your questions on the class comments on the material that is posted in our class stream alongside with the recording that I am doing right now. The last part of the 4 questions is about stickiness. This refers to coherence, meaning is there a connection between the messages or there is no coherence at all? Is there unity of ideas? Are the ideas present in the message clear? Only one idea present, or there are multiple ideas? Does the idea of the message flow smoothly? This is one of the important questions that you need to ask in order for you to know if there is cohesion, there is coherence, and there is unity of ideas in that particular text that you are evaluating for effectiveness. All right, so if this is done on campus, we're supposed to do this in class, but let's practice. You're looking at this picture right now, and I'll give you 30 seconds. I think 30 seconds would be enough for you to generate your own idea. What do you think this picture means? Okay, 30 seconds starts now. Okay, I think that 30-second time is enough. I'm sure that many of you watching this recording right now would always resort to saying that this photo would suggest one of the current issues that the Philippines has been facing since the time of the previous president who managed and administered this country. This is an issue relative to extrajudicial killing, because I'm sure that you have seen the news featuring this photo that has been circulating, or that was circulating, or circulated rather, on the internet and on our news channels online and on our television. Now, as someone who knows about extrajudicial killings, or as someone who particularly knows about current issues happening in the Philippines, I'm sure that would be your easy answer. But if you really would like to know what's the story behind this picture, there are some areas that we need to look into. And in order for us to have a better vision, to have a better understanding of how this photo actually is, we look into different aspects. First, we look into the visual analysis. We analyze the photo carefully. We ask the following questions: how is the image composed? What is in the background? What is in the foreground? And what are the most important visual? So if we look into the picture, we see that there are many people surrounding the crime scene. And we see that inside the crime scene, there is a man who is assumed to be dead. And there is this woman embracing this dead person lying on the ground, which appears to be in a major highway or a road here in the Philippines. And surrounding the background, surrounding the environment where this photo is taken, we see flashcards. We see signages that tells different kinds of messages. So these are just some of the areas that we need to look into in terms of visual analysis if we really want to understand, and if we want to really get the entire message of this particular picture. After looking into the visual, we now look into the image source. We ask ourselves, as a negikan, where did this image come from? What information does the source provide about the origins of this image? If this is from the news agency, what is the news agency telling us about this picture? Is the source reliable and trustworthy? Was this photo taken from a trustworthy or a trusted news source, or a trusted article, or a trusted web source? Or is it given from a contributed person? It matters. It really matters if this photo is just coming from a contributed photo. So the source would be delineated, or the source would be deviated. The source would not be legitimized if that's the case. Was the image found in an image database, or was it being used in another context to convey meaning? So that's also another way for us to look into the image source. So after looking into the visuals, after knowing the source of this photo, we look into the technicalities, the technical quality. Is the image large enough to suit the purpose? Is it visible? Is there any blurry areas on the photo? Are the spectators or the background of the photo clear? Are the color, light, and balance true? Is the image a quality digital image without pixelation or distortion? Because again, knowing the technical quality, considering the technical quality of the photo would always matter, especially if you really like to evaluate this part of the message of this particular image. And I think this one's the last. It's all about the contextual information. So after looking into the picture, after looking into the source, after looking into the technicalities, now we think outside the picture. What information accompanies this image? So that's when we think that this photo suggests of the extrajudicial killing. Does the text change how you see the image? Is the textual information intended to be factual and inform, or is it to influence what and how you see? So these are some of the questions that can help us derive at the contextual information of this photo. So if you really would like to evaluate the image, and if you really would like to evaluate the message behind this image, please be guided with these four major aspects. Now, as I continue, if we intend to evaluate the messages and images of different text types, we follow the following 10 different guidelines. One, we understand how the specific culture lives. If you want to understand texts, messages, images here in the Philippines, you must be very much acquainted with the culture of the country. You must know what a Filipino is. You must know what the culture of the Filipino is. That's when you truly know, and that's when you truly recognize the message imbued on a particular text or a particular image. You also look into how the people in the specific group communicate to each other. You look into the author, you look into the image source, you look into the background, you look into the specifics, the technicalities. You look into how these people communicate, how they collaborate, how they, shall I say, how they make meaning with each other. Okay? Another is okay, there. Learn the symbolism of their culture. So after knowing the Filipino culture, after knowing how we usually communicate, how we get along with each other, it's time for you to know the kind of symbols we have here. Remember what I told you about the flag? That the flag has different symbols and it has meanings. You should know what the meanings of those symbols are. That's a way for you to know, and that's a way for you to better evaluate the different messages imbued on our Philippine flag. Fourth is for you to be aware in every detail, such as artifact, language, and symbolism. Every detail matters. A detail that surrounds a specific message or a specific image, because each of these detail makes up a grander message, a grander understanding of that particular message. And in a way that helps you better effectively understand and evaluate that particular message or text or even image. Okay? I hope I am making sense so far. Fifth is for you to get the meaning being addressed by the image. So after knowing the symbols, after knowing the culture, time for you now to pick up the pieces, the patterns that help you derive at the meaning. Get the important elements conveyed in the image. Get the audience for the image. Look at the background. Look at the foreground. Here, an example, just to put all of those 7 tips in action. Let's look at this picture. What Filipino culture is represented in this image? Okay, I'll give you another 30 seconds for you to, of course, think about this photo and what the culture is being represented in this photo. All right, so I hope at this time you already have guess or thought about the culture, which is very much obvious. By the way, don't mind me. I'm holding my own microphone so that you would hear me better in this recording. So don't mind me. Um, don't mind this small black thing popping up and out every single time here in my recording. So let me continue. This photo that is being shown on our screen is obviously representing the culture in the Philippines, which is specific to harana, the way how courtship is done in the past. Sa kaniadtong panahon, ang atong mga kaluluhan ug kalulahan, atong mga inahan ug amahan ug atong mga tiyo ug katiyaan niagi sa ingani nga kind of pamamanhikan or pagpanguyab, no? This is the way how the Filipino culture, the Filipino courtship is being represented in the past. And this is already part of our culture. Some Filipinos still undergo, some Filipinos still follow this way of courting someone. But I think it's only for a very few evidence, no? Murag gamay na lang kayo ang nibuhat ani karon kasagaran manguyab kay kuan naman lahi naman ang ilang pamaagi with the advent of technology, no? But again, this is possibly one of the important cultural resets that happened in Philippine courtship in the past, no? With the accompaniment of musical instruments that you see on the picture, with the presence of the man singing who appears to be the one courting the girl, and the girl very happy on the picture, showing up on the window and dressing up as a real Filipina and very much pleased of this gesture that is being performed by her suitor. So again, if we look into this picture, we see a lot of culture, we see a lot of symbols, and that's actually a way for us to better understand and better evaluate the message imbued in this picture. I hope everything is clear so far at this point, ladies and gentlemen. I would like you to remember this. The interactions between nonverbal and verbal forms of communication, more in particular, the relations between visual symbols and other than writing and the recording of speech and writing, are important for the evaluation of both texts and images. Highlight interactions between nonverbal and verbal forms of communication, meaning the way how we make our sign languages, the way how we use pictures, the way how we use things, and the way how we also use our words. In a mixture of these two, this is a good avenue, a good source to evaluate messages. And I hope that's also clear to all of you. Here are questions to ask if you want to look at image and if you want to read an image and if you want to know the meaning of that particular image. Do images have a morphology, meaning looking into the colors, lines, planes? Do both text rather and images have a grammar? Is it useful to speak visual literacy? Can texts be considered as images, and how are text and images perceived? And do they really communicate in different kinds of messages? Another set of questions that you may use to ask when you are reading an image. Can an image's messages or message be put into words? In which social context does medieval man prefer the visual from text? And then the other two, as you can see on our screen. These are just questions. You can use these whenever you are needed to read and understand a particular image. Now we go to the next part of our discussion. Let's talk about cultural texts. What does this mean? What does cultural text mean? Cultural texts are those objects, actions, and behaviors that reveal cultural meanings. A photo is an image, but it is also a cultural text. A picture with cultural information beyond just the picture itself. So if we see something like we hold a chair, we hold a photo, we hold a frame, we hold a painting, there's a cultural meaning behind it. Wherever we go, whatever things we see, whatever activities we do, and whatever behavior we show to others, there's a cultural representation behind it. Okay? Please remember that. Food and clothing also suggest cultural information, and it just doesn't stop there. The entire place and space, all the people in interaction, all the rituals and rules, and the various forms in which they manifest themselves are actually readable text, suitable for observation and analysis by the ethnographer and writer. So basically, whatever we do, whatever we see, whatever we show to others, that is a product of cultural text. There's a cultural representation behind it. So here's an example. Take a look at the room or the place you are in right now as you're watching this recording, and briefly catalog the people and or the things that you see around your room. These are objects and actions that have cultural text. Our classroom in CNU, for example, may have a smart room complete with computer or LCD projectors. There may be windows, one or two doors, floors maybe not tiled, etc., etc. What is in a space and what happens in the space are all parts of a cultural text that are available for analysis. The room, the space, the void that we are all filling ourselves in, there's a meaning behind it. There's a cultural representation behind it. That void is being filled. That room is being built. That area is being occupied. That structure is being conceptualized because it is a product of one's culture. The chair that we are sitting, the laptop, the phones, the computers that we are using right now, these are products of culture. The microphone that I'm holding right now is a product of culture. There's a cultural representation in every single thing that we do, see, hear, or even experience. Thinking about cultural text, thinking about our classroom as examples, you ask these questions to help you know the cultural representation, the cultural meaning of a particular object or text. Why are the desks arranged as they are? Ngano nga to mga bangko sa CNU nga naman ang pagka-arrange. Nanay meaning. Okay? You'll be future teachers, you'll be future educators, you'll be future professionals. However you want your room to be, however you want your work to be, there is a cultural meaning behind it. And I hope you get to know how to recognize the cultural representation of these things. These questions can help you ask yourselves whether on knowing how or what are the different cultural representations. Although these questions are geared towards the example that we used about classrooms, but still these questions can be of a good value, a good use whenever you want to know the cultural representation, the cultural meaning of a particular text or image. Okay? I hope at this point everything is clear so far. Let us now proceed to knowing the different biases in the media. We are always and every day exposed to different media. Media in the form of television, media in the form of radio, media in the form of internet, in the comfort of our mobile phone. We always experience and expose ourselves to different kinds of media. Question: do we know how to detect that the media is biased? Do we know when an information provided to us in the media are biased or not? Let's get to know how these different materials, different pieces or sources of information are biased or not. Media bias is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And it's not easy to detect. Why? Because one view of bias could be another view of the truth. Your belief of what is not true may be a belief of something that is true to the other. So it becomes subjective. Something that should remain objective is now becoming subjective, which should not be the case. It is always useful to compare several sources of information, and in doing so, it becomes clear that media coverage is never completely objective. So it's part of our training, it's part of our becoming professionals in knowing the process, knowing the part on how we detect bias. So here are the different kinds of biases present in the media. Bias by omission. From the word omission, meaning omit, meaning we removed something. For every news story that is selected, there are many others that are left out. So if you want to know if this piece of information, if this text is biased, committing bias by omission, you ask the following question. Do the news stories you see show a balanced view of real life? What are the characteristics they have in common? And do some news sources include items that are ignored by others? There should be equality. Dili kay kung unsaray patok, kung unsaray in, kung unsaray istoryaan, unsaray nindot mao ra po'y i-focus. Gitangtang ang uban nga mas importante og mas angay istoryaan. That's bias by omission. The same goes with bias by emphasis. With bias by emphasis, you are intentionally removing other unnecessary and unimportant piece of information simply because you want to emphasize what is beneficial, what is in to the public. So you ask the question, what stories are on the top page or at the top of the hour? Which stories get the largest headline, first and longest coverage on TV or radio? If you want to talk about bias by emphasis, you have to consider how this placement influences people's sense of what is important. Nga naman, kay giuna man ang kato mga butang nga dili untay angay unahon. Napay mga butang-butang nga angay unahon pero gipaulahi siya kay dili siya dakog bili. Dili siya mahog na importante sa atong mga maminaw, sa atong mga viewers. And many of our news agencies in the Philippines are guilty with this. They prioritize what is in, they prioritize what is funny, what gives cheap entertainment to some people. So it benefits them, it benefits the people. So it's a win win situation, but it's actually deviating the objectivity of a particular news or a particular piece of information. That's bias by emphasis. Another is bias by use of language. This is the use of labels such as terrorist, revolutionary, or freedom fighter that can create completely different impressions of the same person or event. Example, activists in the Philippines are now being called as communists. They are being classified as communists. So they are somehow, one way or another, quote unquote, they are being red tagged, which is very unfortunate, very sad, and very infuriating at the same time because activism is not terrorism. So there's something wrong with the choice of words, and there's something wrong with the perception of some people in terms of knowing what is acts of terrorism, acts of violence, and acts of activism. There is bias by the use of language in that. Another is bias in photos. Unflattering pictures can create bad impressions, and partial pictures of scenes can completely change the context of an event. So there are some times that we also feel guilty about this, especially if we are engaged so much in our social media. We choose only those photos which we think we are being represented as someone who is pretty, someone who is handsome, someone who is kaaya-aya. While the other photos who seem to be the most truthful photo are being neglected to be posted on our socials because we do not want other people to think or see the real side or the reality of our selves, which is leading to the fact that we are just living in an illusion. We are living in a deluded world, in a delusionary world. So the same goes with some pieces of information. The same goes with news agencies. There's bias in photos. Another is bias in the source. An article about a cure for cancer written by a drug company is not the same as an article by an independent researcher. Sometimes when there is a piece of information, but it's only provided by someone who is of very little influence, will not make a noise or will not make an impression. But when a piece of information is being given or being promulgated by someone of power, someone of influence, then I'm sure that news will go rounds. Then and that is true to our so-called influencers or vloggers in our Filipino community, in our Filipino online community. Okay, sometimes, most often than not, we also feel guilty about this bias. Be careful with that. Next is bias by the headlines. Some headlines can be deceptive as their main purpose is to basically grab attention. Many people read only the headlines, which is mo sakit sa mga Pilipino. Di mo basag article, ang basahon ra headline, di syempre, kato mga Pinoy nga kurukok sa utok, dili ka ba mo basa, one is kwilag tarong, kaluyan sa ginoo, tuuhan ra pod ang ilang nasabtan, tuuhan ang ilahang mga nakuha, gikan sa ilahang nabasa sa headline. So, I hope none of you here would only stop at reading the headlines. I hope that if not all, most of you here have a habit of reading the entire article as how I do it, how others are also doing it. Okay? Let's make it a habit. It doesn't take much of our time to read the entire article because it's not a full interview. It's just a news article. Just an article that can help us understand what the true bits of information is all about relative to that particular news or with that information. Okay, so that's bias by headline. Another is bias by repetition. The repetition of a particular event or idea can lead to people to believe that it is true, very widespread, and much more important than it really is. So let's say, for example, COVID-19. Remember what happened in 2020? COVID-19 was not known as COVID-19 by then. So it was sometime in December of 2019 and January of 2020 when some people, especially those people in other areas in Southeast Asia from China, like Japan, like Korea, they started showing different news about a virus. And the virus was then called nCoV-19. It wasn't called COVID, it was nCoV. Philippines, on the other hand, did not take this news seriously. So they just, they did not care much about this. Even the then president Duterte was making fun, making jokes about this virus news until it became a reality and until it became out of hand. It was uncontrollable for one. It was uncontrollable towards the end of February that led to the government, led to the country in announcing the complete lockdown of all people in March, on March 15th. Okay, I will never forget that day because that's the day that I thought that the world would basically end. Nagtuod jud ko adto ng adlaw mga matay tanan, no? But 3 years after, here we are all now watching this recording and me doing this recorded discussion. So what are the odds, right? So again, that's bias by repetition. Another is bias in numbers and statistics. Sometimes numbers are misled. Sometimes numbers are misrepresented. So yun pag-usab ang number to show bigger emphasis or to show lesser emphasis, depending on the intent of the particular writer or the particular speaker. So be careful with that kind of bias. Another is bias by diversity, bias in diversity. What is the race and gender diversity at the news outlet you watch compared to the community it serves? So because of the presence of the LGBTQIA plus community, there's already becoming a new form of bias, especially in the pieces of information that we are exposed to and the different news articles that we are reading, no? In order to fairly represent different communities, news outlets should have members of those communities in decision making positions. Another is bias from point of view. So this is the very common kind of bias because magdepende man sa jud na sa tong point of view. Ang gituuhan sa usa dili pud mao ang gituuhan sa laing tao. So magdepende jud na siya sa point of view. Political coverage often focuses on how issues affect politicians or corporate executives rather than those directly affected by the issue. So ang pinaka common nga example for this bias is when we talk about politics, our political stance. Okay? One's political stance is not the same with the other political stance, but doesn't mean that we are not expected to respect or observe respect, no? But here in the Philippines, kay Pinoy Manggudta, some really love to go against our political stance in making an attempt of influencing us to take their own political stance and believing their own political stance, which should not be the case because we have our own opinion, we have our own beliefs, we have our own principles, and our political stance are shaped with our beliefs and our principles and our way of knowing and reading things, way of exposing ourselves to things. So we cannot really expect others cannot really expect us to, dive into their political stance. So that's when bias from point of view would come in. So those are the different kinds of media bias that is very much applicable to texts and messages. Again, if you have questions as we are going along with our discussion for this recorded video, let me know so I would be able to respond to your questions properly. We are now reaching towards the end of our discussion. Let's talk about the different text types. This is just a review. We have, okay, sorry about that. My cats and other neighbor cats are playing on the rooftop, which is very unfortunate. Sorry for that disruption. I'll continue with the narrative, descriptive, expository, and argumentative text types, which I think you already know from your senior high school and junior high school years. Allow me to run through just to give you a little review. When we talk about narrative text, these are real world events and real world time. This talks about the truth. Okay? It talks about telling stories. Could be fictional or non-fictional. Okay? It gives us chronological sequence. There is narration telling us what to go first, what to go next, and what to go next, and what to go last. Descriptive is when something or someone is being described. Locations of person and things in space are being concerned here. It provides background, foreground, different kinds of information for the text to be descriptive, just for us to generate an image in our minds. Directive text, these are concerned with concrete future activity. These are concerned with imperatives, meaning giving commands. And also, these are forms of substitute for polite questions and suggestive remarks. So these are examples of directive text. Expository text, these are texts that will expose us to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Examples of expository text are essays, summaries, definitions, analytical papers. These and others are examples of expository text. And the last, which I wasn't able to include, is the argumentative. When we talk about argumentative, these are texts that tend to argue a certain point of view or a certain stance. And it doesn't intend for the author to influence the others to believe or side on a particular point of view, but rather provide the audience with an array of choices, whether to believe or take a certain stance or argue with another stance. So that is that is the definition of argumentative text. So ladies and gentlemen, those are the ways, the tips, and the processes on how we evaluate messages of different text types reflecting different cultures. If you have reached this part of our recorded discussion, thank you very much for viewing this recorded session. After you are watching this, please work on the academic task that I will be assigning to you. You will be able to completely and comprehensively accomplish that academic task once you have finished listening and taking part of this recorded discussion. So that will be all for now. If you have questions or clarifications regarding this recording, please do not hesitate to let me know through sending the comment or sending the question on our class comments, or send it directly through our messenger chat group for me to respond to your questions immediately. Thank you very much. That would be all for now. I'll see you on the next unit, and please start working on the academic task assigned for this particular unit. Thank you, and I'll see you around the campus.